I am Julian Vance, 32 years old. For the last 10 years, I have been the invisible backbone keeping my family's $25 million Lake Tahoe luxury real estate empire from collapsing under the weight of their own greed. But today, they officially erased me. While I stood in the back of the grand living room, exhausted from spending another 80-hour week keeping our luxury portfolio afloat, my father raised a crystal glass of expensive scotch and declared to 50 cheering high society guests that my older brother, Preston, was the sole heir to everything, and that I was getting absolutely nothing. He looked right at me, laughed, and told the entire room that I was just a genetic dead end who existed to fix the toilets. But there is one major thing my father, my mother, and my arrogant brother do not know about who actually owns the deeds to that $25 million estate. And right now, my brother is sitting in a federal penitentiary while my parents are living in a cramped RV, begging me for a dime. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how their entire gold-plated kingdom turned to ashes in 3 seconds, hit that like button if you believe in poetic justice. And please let me know down in the comments where you are watching from today. Now, let's go back to the exact moment the room went dead silent. The clink of a heavy silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute cut through the low hum of classical music and wealthy chatter. 50 VIP guests stopped talking. They were local politicians, real estate investors, country club board members, and my aunts and uncles, all dressed in designer suits and evening gowns, holding top-shelf drinks. The setting was the grand living room of the main Vance estate, a massive timber and glass mansion perched directly over the freezing blue waters of Lake Tahoe. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed a breathtaking mountain sunset, but the atmosphere inside was thick with calculated greed. My father, Arthur Vance, stood by the massive stone fireplace. He was 64, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke Italian tuxedo. Beside him stood my mother, Catherine, looking like the ultimate matriarch in a pearl-encrusted dress, and my 29-year-old brother, Preston. Preston was wearing a smug, practiced grin, holding his glass of champagne like he had just won the Masters. I stood 30 feet away, entirely in the shadows near the floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves. I wore a simple charcoal suit I bought off the rack 3 years ago. In my right hand, held firmly against my ribs, was a single, sealed manila envelope. My father cleared his throat, his deep, booming voice echoing off the vaulted cedar ceilings. Friends, family, esteemed colleagues, we are gathered here today for a truly historic moment for the Vance legacy. Following the official reading of my late mother's final will and testament, and with the full blessings of myself and my wonderful wife, Catherine, we are officially passing the torch. He paused, letting the dramatic tension build. He put a heavy, affectionate hand on Preston's shoulder. To my eldest son, Preston Vance, the new sole heir and controlling managing director of the entire $25 million Lake Tahoe estate portfolio. Every mansion, every boathouse, every dollar. The room erupted. Applause echoed off the glass. People cheered, raising their glasses. Preston soaked it in, raising his chin, shaking hands with a state senator who clapped him on the back. My mother beamed, wiping a single, perfectly timed tear from her cheek. Then, my father's eyes tracked through the crowd. He found me standing by the bookshelves. The warmth in his face instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, hard sneer. He raised his glass a fraction of an inch in my direction, making sure the 50 guests turned to look at where I was standing. And to my younger son, Julian, my father said, his voice dripping with condescension, who has been a very useful hand around the properties. You get a month's rent free in the garage apartment so you can find yourself a real job. Let this be a lesson to everyone here. In this family, we reward visionaries, not maintenance men. A few cruel chuckles rippled through the crowd. My cousins smirked. They looked at me with that pitying, disgusted expression reserved for the help. They expected me to drop my head. They expected me to cry or run out of the room in shame. I did not flinch. My heart rate did not even spike. I gripped the thick paper of the manila envelope, felt the sharp, clean edge against my palm, and let a slow, icy smile curve my lips. I took 3 steps forward. The heavy hardwood floorboards creaked under my dress shoes. The crowd parted slightly, confused by my lack of humiliation. I did not look at my father. I did not look at my gloating brother. I locked eyes directly with Thaddeus Sterling, the 58-year-old chief legal counsel for the Vance family, who was standing near the wet bar holding a leather briefcase. The room grew quiet. I kept my voice entirely level, but it carried to the very back of the vaulted room. "Lawyer," I said calmly, "you really don't know, do you?" Thaddeus frowned. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking at the manila envelope in my hand. Then his eyes dropped to my posture, to the absolute lack of fear in my face. I saw the exact second his legal instinct kicked in. The color drained out of his cheeks so fast he looked like he had seen a ghost. His champagne flute slipped a fraction of an inch in his fingers. My father's face instantly turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He took a hard step away from the fireplace, his veins bulging in his neck. "No," my father screamed, his voice cracking with sudden, unhinged panic. "No." "What?" I did not answer him. Not yet. I thought the hardest part of this night was facing the humiliation. I was so incredibly wrong. The silence that followed my father's scream was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the silver champagne buckets. 50 elite guests stood frozen with their glasses halfway to their mouths. My mother's practiced smile had collapsed into a sharp, ugly grimace. Preston had stopped handshaking. His arm hung uselessly at his side, his arrogant smirk replaced by a twitch in his jaw. Arthur Vance glared at me across the Persian rug, breathing heavily through his nose like a cornered bull. "I asked you a question, Julian. What the hell are you talking about? Stop playing games and get out of my house." I kept my eyes on Thaddeus Sterling. The lawyer hadn't moved. He was staring at the seal on my envelope as if it were an active grenade. I did not open it. Instead, I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. I wanted them to feel the crushing physical weight of the room shifting. For 10 years, I had been the family's shock absorber. Whenever something broke, whenever a legal deadline loomed, whenever money went missing, I was the one who quietly fixed it in the dark. I was a high-functioning asset, a property management algorithm with a pulse. They had trained me to be completely invisible until there was a crisis. Well, I was the crisis now. But before I tore their paper kingdom down to the bedrock, I needed to take them back to the exact foundation they had built it on. I needed them to remember the blood they had extracted from me to pay for the designer clothes on their backs. "You want to know what's in the envelope, Arthur?" I said, dropping the word "Dad" for the first time in my life. The word tasted like ash anyway. "We will get to the paperwork in a moment. But since we have the mayor, a state senator, and all of our primary investors in the room, I think we owe them an accurate accounting of what exactly Preston is inheriting today." "Shut your mouth," my mother hissed, stepping forward, her silk dress rustling. "Don't you dare ruin your brother's celebration with your jealousy. You have always been bitter. You have always hated his success." "Success?" I laughed. It was a dry, raspy sound. Catherine Preston couldn't tell a standard residential lease agreement from a Cheesecake Factory lunch menu. He has spent the last decade on what you call expansion trips. Let's call them what they actually are. 3-day cocaine benders in Las Vegas. $50,000 blackjack losses in Reno. Ski weekends in Aspen paid for out of the corporate operational account. "Lies," Preston barked, taking a step toward me, his face flushing dark pink. "Dad, get security in here. Throw him out off the dock." "I am not going anywhere," I said, my voice cutting through his bark like a saw through soft pine. Because for 10 years, while Preston was recovering from the intense physical exhaustion of being the heir apparent on yachts in Cabo, I was the one waking up at 3 in the morning when the main boiler blew in the North Lodge. I was the one standing ankle-deep in freezing, rancid water, holding a flashlight between my teeth, wrapping pipes so the HOA wouldn't hit us with code violations. I looked around at the 50 guests. I saw the state senator slowly lower his glass. I saw a few investors exchange nervous glances. I spent 80 hours a week sitting in dreary municipal planning offices. I continued, pacing 2 steps to the left, keeping the envelope clearly visible. Fighting city council members over zoning permits for the commercial boathouse. I negotiated with corrupt contractors who tried to pad their invoices by 40% just because they saw the wealthy Vance name printed on the check. I built the spreadsheets. I balanced the ledgers. I kept this family out of federal bankruptcy court twice before I turned 25. My father took another step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. You did your job. We fed you. We housed you. You were compensated. Compensated. I repeated, the word ringing off the glass. I was paid $45,000 a year with no 401k match, no health insurance, and no equity, while Preston pulled $300,000 in unearned owner draws to buy custom watches. You didn't raise a son, Arthur. You funded an insurance policy that you never intended to pay the premium on. You kept me in the closet until a pipe burst or an auditor called, and then you shoved me right back into the dark. I looked at Preston. He was sweating now. A bead of perspiration rolled down his temple into his collar. You thought I was just an obedient little spare, I told my brother softly, desperate for a single scrap of validation. You thought I was just fixing your toilets. But what none of you realized was that while I was crawling under the crawl spaces and auditing the shadow accounts, I was learning exactly where the bodies were buried. I learned the tax codes. I learned the banking regulations. And most importantly, I learned how to collect receipts. Thaddeus Sterling took a shaky step toward Arthur, whispering frantically into my father's ear. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the lawyer was telling him to shut me up legally, but it was far too late for cease and desist letters. Julian, my father warned, his voice dropping into that dangerous, abusive register he used to terrify me when I was a teenager. If you say another word, I will personally make sure you never work in real estate in this state again. I will crush you. You can't crush someone who already cashed out, I replied. I looked down at the manila envelope. The red wax seal was intact. But to understand why opening this envelope was going to send my brother to prison, you have to understand the bloody car crash, the forged signatures, and the exact conversation in my father's study 7 days ago that turned my heart into solid ice. To understand the sheer mathematical insanity of my family, you have to understand the Thanksgiving dinner of 2023. We were sitting around the massive 20-foot mahogany table in the formal dining room. The table was loaded with organic turkey, expensive truffles, and imported wines bought from the local gourmet market. My mother had invited 3 prominent real estate developers and their wives. The snow was falling outside, painting the Tahoe pines in a picture-perfect holiday postcard. Preston was holding court at the head of the table next to my father. He was wearing a $12,000 Rolex Submariner, a congratulatory gift from my parents for supposedly closing a commercial lease on our North Shore retail complex. The key to commercial real estate, Preston said loudly, swirling his Napa Valley Cabernet, is aggressive leverage. You have to project absolute dominance to the tenants. You let them know that you own the ground they walk on. That's how I secured the 10-year lease with the boutique hotel group. Pure negotiation charisma. The developers nodded approvingly. My father beamed, raising his glass. To Preston, a true chip off the old block. He has the Vance instincts. I sat at the very far end of the table, near the swinging door leading to the kitchen. My plate had the dry dark meat and cold stuffing. I didn't have a glass of wine. I had a glass of tap water. My right hand was throbbing under the table, wrapped in white gauze. 2 days earlier, I had sliced 3 fingers open on a jagged piece of sheet metal while personally replacing the ventilation ducting in that exact retail complex Preston was bragging about. Preston hadn't negotiated that lease. He hadn't even read it. The boutique hotel group had actually threatened to walk away from the deal 3 weeks prior because Preston had missed 4 consecutive walkthrough meetings. He had been on a chartered yacht in Cabo San Lucas with his fraternity brothers. I had spent 72 straight hours redesigning the HVAC specifications, rewriting the indemnity clauses, and personally guaranteeing the structural modifications just to keep the hotel group's attorneys from filing a breach of contract lawsuit. When the deal finally closed, the commission check went directly into the Vance corporate primary account. 2 days later, the submariner showed up on Preston's wrist. I took a sip of my tap water and watched my brother lie. I gripped my fork under the cloth until my knuckles turned white. My own mother looked down the table, saw my bandaged hand, and frowned. Not out of concern, but out of annoyance. "Julian," she murmured, her voice carrying over the gravy boat. "Keep your hand off the linen. The ointment smells like a Walmart mechanic's shop. You're ruining the aroma of the truffles." One of the developer's wives offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. I quietly placed my hand in my lap. I didn't say a word. I just repeated the numbers in my head. Account ending in 4402. Routing number 091. Transfer volume 82,000. That was my reality. But the true turning point, the moment I realized I was dealing with actual criminal sociopaths, happened 6 months later on a rainy Tuesday in March. It was 2:15 in the morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand of my cramped garage apartment. It wasn't my father. It was Preston. "Jules," he breathed into the receiver. The background noise was chaotic, sirens wailing, rain lashing against metal, and the unmistakable sound of a police radio squawking. His voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and panic. "Jules, you gotta get down here. Interstate 80, just outside Reno. Mile marker 24. "Preston, what did you do?" I asked, swinging my legs out of bed, my feet hitting the cold linoleum. "I spun out," he stammered. "The roads were slick. I clipped a concrete divider and, Jules, I hit another car. A Honda. There's a woman. She's screaming. The cops are setting up flares." My blood ran cold. "Are you hurt? Did you call 911? "The cops are already here," he hissed. "Listen to me, you idiot. I was driving Dad's silver Ferrari 488. The one registered to the Corporate Executive Trust. If I get hit with a DUI involving bodily injury, the state will revoke my managing broker license. Dad's escrow accounts will get frozen. You have to tell them you were driving." I stopped halfway into my jeans. "What? Get in your truck, drive out here, and tell the highway patrol you took the car out to test the brakes and I was just the passenger," Preston demanded, his voice turning vicious. "I'll transfer 10 grand into your personal checking account tomorrow. Just do it. Dad said you have to." "You called Dad before you called me?" "Of course I called Dad. He told me to put you on the hook. You don't have a broker license to lose. Get your ass out here right now." I hung up the phone. I stood in the dark garage apartment for 5 minutes, listening to the rain hit the roof. My own father had explicitly instructed his drunk, reckless golden son to frame me for a felony hit and run just to protect corporate insurance premiums. I didn't drive to Interstate 80. Instead, I drove to the main estate office. I unlocked the heavy oak door, turned off the security cameras using the master administrative override I had installed myself, and booted up the primary server. I accessed the Corporate Executive Trust banking portal. Sure enough, at 2:08 a.m., 7 minutes before Preston called me, my father had initiated an emergency wire transfer of $60,000 to a private criminal defense attorney in Reno. I didn't stop there. I dug into the subfolders. For 3 hours, while Preston was being booked into the Washoe County Jail for felony DUI, I systematically downloaded every single financial ledger, every tax return, every forged contractor release form, and every offshore wire transfer from the last 7 years onto an encrypted external hard drive. When my father bailed Preston out the next afternoon using corporate operational funds, Arthur stormed into my garage apartment and slapped me across the face so hard my lips split against my teeth. "You selfish piece of garbage," Arthur roared, towering over me while my mother stood in the doorway weeping fake tears. "Your brother spent the night in a concrete cell because you were too lazy to get in your truck. You are a disgrace to the Vance name." I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my thumb. I looked at my mother. She turned her face away. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said quietly, keeping my eyes cast down. "My truck wouldn't start. They thought they had broken my spirit." They thought I was just a cowardly maintenance man. They didn't know that the encrypted hard drive was already sitting inside a safe deposit box at a Chase Bank branch in downtown Tahoe, registered under a corporate LLC they had never heard of. The explosion that set tonight's events into inevitable motion happened exactly 7 days ago. It was a crisp Monday morning. I walked into my father's formal mahogany study on the second floor of the main mansion. I carried a thick, professionally bound leather folder containing the Q3 financial audit for the Vance Lake Tahoe portfolio. The numbers were staggering. Despite a brutal regional real estate downturn, our portfolio had just cleared its most profitable quarter in corporate history, netting $1.8 million in pure operational profit. It wasn't because of the market. It was entirely due to a comprehensive structural reorganization plan I had spent 6 months designing and implementing. I had renegotiated our commercial debt ratios, eliminated redundant vendor contracts, and restructured our short-term luxury rental pricing algorithms. Arthur Vance was sitting behind his massive antique executive desk, sipping a fresh espresso, flipping through a golf magazine. He didn't look up when I closed the heavy double doors behind me. "Set the reports on the credenza, Julian," he said casually, "and tell Carlos to trim the hedges near the guest cottage." The HOA president complained about overhanging branches. I didn't walk to the credenza. I walked directly to the front of his desk and laid the leather folder right over his golf magazine. He sighed, annoyed, and finally looked up. "What is this?" "That is the third quarter closing statement," I said, my voice calm, professional. "Net operational profit is up 34% year over year. Cash reserves are sitting at $4.2 million. Every single commercial property is fully leased, and the short-term vacation rental occupancy rate is leading the entire basin." Arthur flipped open the cover, scanned the bottom line, and gave a brisk, indifferent nod. "Fine. Good numbers. Tell Carlos about the hedges." "I'm not here to talk about landscaping, Dad," I said. I pulled out the heavy leather executive chair opposite his desk and sat down without being invited. Arthur's eyebrows twitched. In the Vance household, nobody sat in Arthur's study unless instructed. "I am 29 years old," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I have held the title of Senior Operations Manager for 6 years. I hold 2 undergraduate degrees that I paid for myself by working nights at a lumber yard. I designed the restructuring that generated that $1.8 million. I want my title officially updated to Chief Operating Officer. And I want 10% equity in the Vance Lake Tahoe Holding Trust." The silence in the study was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur didn't get angry immediately. Instead, he looked at me with a slow, genuine expression of utter bewilderment. It was the exact expression a man might make if his microwave had suddenly spoken up and demanded a weekend off. He actually chuckled, shaking his head, and reached for his espresso. "Equity," Arthur laughed, taking a sip. "Julian, you have been reading too many business paperbacks. You don't get equity. You get a salary. You get a roof over your head in one of the most expensive zip codes in North America. A garage apartment that leaks when the snow melts," I corrected him, "and a salary that is 20% below the regional median for an entry-level bookkeeper. I do the work, Dad. Preston does nothing. He hasn't stepped foot on a property in 4 months. I built this portfolio's current valuation. I earned a share. That was the exact trigger. The word earned." The amusement vanished from Arthur Vance's face like a blown candle. He slammed his espresso cup down onto the mahogany saucer so hard the porcelain cracked. Dark brown liquid sloshed over the rim onto the Q3 report. He stood up, leaning his massive frame over the desk, planting his knuckles on the leather. His eyes were cold, dead, entirely devoid of paternal warmth. "You earned," Arthur snarled, his voice dropping into a guttural rasp. "You earned nothing. I put the clothes on your back for 18 years. I paid the medical bills when you broke your arm in middle school. I funded the groceries you shoved into your mouth. Do you think that was charity?" He walked around the side of the desk, stopping 2 feet from my chair, towering over me. "You are not a partner in this firm, Julian," my father stated, pointing a thick finger directly between my eyes. "You are my investment. I poured capital into raising you specifically so you could be useful to this family enterprise. You do not get dividends from the company. You are the company's equipment. Do you understand me? You are an operating asset. Do not ever confuse your maintenance function with inherent worth." I sat frozen in the leather chair. I didn't breathe. I felt something inside my chest physically snap. It wasn't my pride. My pride had died years ago. It was the very last microscopic thread of hope that I had a father. That was the narcissistic mathematics that governed my entire existence. To Arthur and Catherine Vance, children were not human beings to be nurtured. Preston was a luxury trophy to be polished and displayed to the country club. And I was an expensive appliance, a refrigerator or a HVAC unit, that owed them operational output to pay off the purchase price of my own childhood. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I slowly stood up from the chair. "I understand completely, Dad," I said, my voice entirely flat, stripped of all human emotion. "Thank you for clarifying my position." I turned and walked out of the study. Behind me, I heard him pick up his golf magazine. He thought he had put the rebellious appliance back in its place. He thought I was walking back to the garage to sulk. Instead, I walked down the stairs, went into the main estate records room, opened the floor safe, and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had been preparing with an outside accountant for 3 years. He wanted an investment return. Fine. I was officially cashing out. But I had to wait 7 days. I had to wait for tonight, the public reading of my grandmother's will, to drop the hammer. Because I knew that once Preston thought he owned the crown, he would do something so unforgivable it would destroy any legal defense they had left. And sure enough, 20 minutes ago, Preston proved me right. Back in the grand living room, the 50 VIP guests were still staring at me, waiting for Thaddeus Sterling to explain why he looked like he was about to have a coronary. Preston decided he had played the silent victim long enough. He peeled himself away from my mother's side, adjusted the lapels of his designer tuxedo, and sauntered over to where I stood near the bookshelves. He smelled like expensive Tom Ford cologne, 18-year-old scotch, and completely unearned confidence. He stopped 4 feet away, swirling his champagne flute, looking me up and down with that trademark half-lidded, mocking smirk. "Don't look so sour, Jules," Preston said. He kept his voice low, pitched just right so the state senator and the nearby investors could hear his benevolent older brother act. "It's nothing personal. Someone has to lose for someone else to win. That's just free market capitalism. Dad and Mom made a corporate allocation decision. You just don't have the executive profile to manage a $25 million luxury asset." "You haven't won anything, Preston?" I replied, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides, the envelope resting against my thigh. "You were handed a lottery ticket that you didn't buy, for a drawing you didn't enter." Preston let out a sharp, barking laugh. "Earned? Who gives a damn about earned? Possession is 9/10 of the law, little brother. And as of 10 minutes ago, when Dad read Grandma Beatrice's instructions, I possess 98% of the voting shares in the Vance Holding Trust. I own the dirt. I own the docks. In fact, I'm already making executive infrastructure improvements." He gestured grandly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the north lawn. "Big vision stuff," Preston gloated, taking a slow sip of champagne. "Starting with the lakefront guest cottage. I'm having the interior gutted tomorrow morning." My stomach instantly tightened into a hard knot. The lakefront guest cottage wasn't an empty rental unit. "What do you mean, gutted?" I asked, my voice dropping. "Clara Abernathy lives in that cottage." Clara Abernathy was 84 years old. She was my late grandmother Beatrice's dearest friend, a retired school teacher who had lived on the Vance estate for 22 years. When Grandma Beatrice was dying of pancreatic cancer, she had made my father swear on a Bible that Clara would have a safe, rent-free home on the estate for the rest of her natural life. Clara was frail, suffered from severe arthritis, and was terrified of the harsh Tahoe winters. For the last 10 years, I was the one who chopped her firewood, carried her weekly groceries up the icy steps, and sat with her drinking herbal tea on Sunday afternoons. She was the only human being in this entire zip code who ever asked me how my day was. Preston gave a callous, indifferent shrug. Not anymore, she doesn't. I gave her official verbal notice this morning. Sent Carlos and 2 guys from the landscaping crew over to pack up her knickknacks and dump them at that Motel 6, off Interstate 80 near the interstate interchange. The blood drained completely out of my face. The room seemed to tilt. You did what? I evicted her, Preston said smoothly, smiling at a passing country club board member. She was crying, making a whole pathetic geriatric scene on the porch, clutching some old photo albums. But you can't let emotional sentimentality interfere with asset optimization. That cottage has prime water frontage. I'm converting it into a private VIP cigar lounge and poker room for my high roller network. I need the square footage for the after-party tonight. I stared at him. My vision literally tunneled. He hadn't just evicted a tenant. He had thrown an 84-year-old dying woman, who was essentially family, into a filthy, drug-infested highway motel in the middle of a freezing mountain night just so he and his degenerate fraternity brothers had a place to smoke illegally imported Cuban cigars. He hadn't even waited for the legal probate paperwork to clear. He did it 9 hours before he officially owned the property. She's 84 years old, Preston, I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage so violent my teeth clicked. Her heart medication needs refrigeration. You put her in a highway motel. I cut the corporate dead weight, Julian, Preston sneered, stepping into my personal space, tapping his champagne flute against my chest. Which brings me directly to your status. Dad and I had an executive strategy session. We don't need a full-time property manager on payroll anymore. I've got buddies from my college fraternity who can handle the QuickBooks software for half your salary. He leaned in closer, his breath warm and foul against my ear. Let's be brutally honest, Jules, Preston whispered, his voice dripping with pure venom. It's not like you have anything else going on in your sad little life. No wife, no kids, no real estate equity, no legacy. You are a genetic dead end. You're an operational spare tire. He reached out and physically poked his index finger hard into my shoulder. So here is your severance package, Preston commanded, gesturing toward the main hallway. One of the caterers just dropped a tray of shrimp cocktail and spilled a bottle of moat onto the hardwood near the coat room. Go grab a mop and a bucket from the pantry and clean up the mess before the mayor steps in it. Make yourself useful to this family for once. He winked at me, turned on his heel, and sauntered back toward my mother, high-fiving a cousin as he walked. I stood motionless. I felt the charcoal fabric of my suit jacket resting against my shoulders. I looked at my mother across the room. She had watched the entire interaction. She had seen Preston poke me. She knew Clara Abernathy was sitting in a freezing Motel 6. And my mother just took a sip of her champagne and turned her back to me. In that exact fraction of a second, as my mother's silk evening gown swirled away from my line of sight, a memory hit me with the kinetic force of a freight train. It was a flash from 3 weeks ago. I had come back to the main house unexpectedly at noon to grab a master plumbing schematic. As I walked past the formal dining room, the heavy double doors were slightly ajar. I heard my mother's voice. She wasn't talking to my father. She was talking on her cell phone to her younger brother, Uncle Richard, a failed real estate speculator living in Scottsdale. I finally convinced Arthur to finalize the trust amendments. Richard, my mother had said, her voice brisk, calculating, entirely devoid of maternal softness. Preston gets 98%. Julian gets 0. There was a pause as Richard spoke. Then my mother laughed. A sharp, vindictive sound. Of course it's about the Scottsdale loan, she snapped into the receiver. 2 years ago, when you needed that $400,000 bridge loan to save your commercial plaza, I told Arthur to pull it out of the Tahoe operational reserves. Do you know who blocked it? Julian. He brought those stupid audit spreadsheets to Arthur and proved that your plaza was insolvent. He told his own father that lending you corporate funds would violate fiduciary trust codes. He embarrassed me in front of my own husband, Richard. He chose his stupid accounting rules over his own mother's family. She had paused, taking a sip of tea. Arthur was hesitating about leaving Julian out entirely. My mother confessed coldly. He thought Julian was useful for maintenance. But I told Arthur that Julian is mentally unstable. I told him Julian has a severe resentment disorder, and that if we give him even 5% equity, he will tie Preston up in endless operational litigation. I wept, Richard. I produced tears. I told Arthur that for the sake of family harmony, we have to cut the cancer out completely. Don't worry about Julian. He has no money to hire a lawyer anyway. He'll stay in the garage and fix the pipes because he has nowhere else to go. Standing in the grand living room, surrounded by 50 elite VIP guests, that memory snapped into absolute focus. My mother hadn't been a passive victim of my father's domineering patriarchy. She was the architect. She was the one who had systematically poisoned my father's perception of my sanity for 24 months simply because I had refused to let her drain our corporate cash reserves to bail out her bankrupt brother. She had weaponized her own tears to strip her youngest son of his inheritance, his dignity, and his future. I looked at Arthur Vance. I looked at Catherine Vance. I looked at Preston Vance. For 32 years, I had carried the crushing, suffocating guilt of the disappointing son. I had swallowed the insults, endured the physical labor, and accepted the poverty wages because deep down in the darkest, most vulnerable corner of my soul, I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just saved them from enough scandals, they would eventually look at me and say, "We love you, son. You belong at the table." That little boy died on the mahogany floorboards of Lake Tahoe tonight. They didn't want a son. They wanted a pack mule that didn't kick back. Well, the mule had just grown fangs. I looked down at the manila envelope in my right hand. The red wax seal caught the reflection of the crystal chandelier above. I didn't walk to the pantry to grab a mop. I walked directly to the center of the massive Persian rug, placing myself exactly equidistant between my father, my mother, and the state senator. Thaddeus Sterling saw my trajectory. The lawyer took 3 frantic steps forward, holding his hands up like a traffic cop facing a runaway semi-truck. "Julian, please, let's step into the executive study. We can discuss administrative severance terms privately. Do not make a public spectacle." "Step aside, Thaddeus," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying, absolute resonance that instantly killed the remaining ambient chatter in the room. I raised the manila envelope chest-high so all 50 guests could clearly see it. "Preston just informed me that I need to make myself useful and clean up a mess," I announced to the entire ballroom. "He is entirely correct. This family enterprise has been leaking toxic waste for 7 years. But I'm not going to use a mop." I slipped my right thumb under the heavy flap of the envelope. I pushed hard against the reinforced paper. Ryayip. The sound of the thick manila paper tearing echoed off the vaulted cedar ceilings. In the dead, breathless silence of the grand living room, it sounded exactly like a dry bone snapping in half. My father lunged forward. "Julian, stop." I pulled out a stack of crisp, legal cap documents stamped with official Blue County recording seals and laid them flat across the nearest silver hors d'oeuvres table, pushing a $500 tray of imported caviar right onto the floor. "Let's talk about who owns the dirt," I said. To understand why Thaddeus Sterling looked like his soul had just left his physical body, we have to pause the clock for 60 seconds and look at what I had actually been doing inside my leaking garage apartment every night between midnight and 4 a.m. for the last 36 months. When my late grandmother, Beatrice Vance, was in her final stages of terminal cancer 3 years ago, she didn't trust my father. She had watched Arthur turn the Vance family business from a respected regional development firm into a highly leveraged, tax-evading shell game. And she knew that Preston was a reckless, gambling-addicted narcissist who would incinerate the family's entire asset base within 12 months of getting signing authority. 2 weeks before she died, Grandma Beatrice quietly summoned me to her hospice bed at the Tahoe Forest Hospital. She didn't call Arthur. She didn't call Thaddeus Sterling. She called me, and she brought in an independent, ruthless forensic trust attorney named Sarah Jenkins. Julian, Grandma Beatrice had whispered, holding my rough, calloused hand in her frail fingers. Your father thinks he is a titan. He is a fool walking on thin ice. I am not going to let him destroy the legacy my husband built. And I am certainly not going to let them keep treating you like a peasant on your own land. Right there in that hospital room, witnessed by Sarah Jenkins and a chief notary public, Grandma Beatrice executed a master irrevocable trust restructuring. She didn't leave the $25 million Lake Tahoe real estate portfolio to the Vance Holding Trust. She executed a master deed transfer, legally conveying 100% of the physical real estate, the land, the main mansion, the 3 North Shore commercial plazas, the boathouses, and the lakefront guest cottage, into a brand new entity, the Beatrice Vance Dynasty Preservation Trust. And who was named the sole, exclusive, unremovable managing trustee with 100% controlling voting authority? Me, Julian Vance. We didn't record the deeds immediately. Sarah Jenkins advised me to hold them in escrow under strict confidentiality provisions. Why? Because under Nevada and California statutory real estate law, if Grandma Beatrice passed away and Arthur publicly claimed ownership of the assets on corporate tax filings while operating under a false presumption of title, and I quietly paid the property taxes out of an independent escrow account to maintain valid legal standing, Arthur would be building his entire corporate financial structure on land he legally did not own. For 3 years I played the idiot. I let Arthur shout at me. I let my mother mock my clothes. I let Preston strut around wearing $12,000 watches. Every single time Preston racked up a $50,000 gambling debt at the blackjack tables in Reno, Arthur would instruct me to quietly wire corporate funds to cover it. I did wire the funds, but I didn't wire Vance corporate money. I wired money out of a private shadow account funded by the Dynasty Trust's independent commercial rental yields, and I logged every single dollar as a secured, personal promissory bridge loan executed between Julian Vance and Preston Vance, using Preston's presumed future equity as collateral. They thought I was keeping the books to save them from the IRS. I was keeping the books to build an airtight federal embezzlement and wire fraud case. And earlier this morning, while Preston was busy sending landscapers to throw Clara Abernathy's belongings into a Motel 6 dump, Sarah Jenkins walked into the Washoe County Clerk's office and officially recorded the master deeds. "What the hell are you doing?" Arthur Vance roared, charging toward the silver hors d'oeuvres table where I had just scattered the legal documents. He reached out his massive hand to snatch the papers, but Thaddeus Sterling intercepted him, grabbing my father's forearm with surprising strength. "Arthur, don't touch them," Thaddeus snapped, his voice shrill with genuine legal terror. "Do not touch recorded county instruments." Thaddeus leaned over the table, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down the bridge of his sweaty nose. His trembling fingers hovered over the first document, the master warranty deed for the main $25 million Lake Tahoe estate. He read the top line, then his eyes darted to the bottom right corner. He stared at the official, raised purple embossed stamp of the county recorder's office. Recorded, October 14, 2023. Instrument number, 9948201. Fee parcel. Exempt dynasty conveyance. This is impossible," Thaddeus stammered, his voice cracking so loudly the state senator stepped 3 feet closer to get a look. "Arthur, these are recorded master deeds. They convey the entire physical parcel of the primary estate, the commercial boathouses, and the North Shore retail complexes directly to the Beatrice Dynasty Trust." "Lies!" my mother shrieked from across the Persian rug, her face contorting into a mask of pure fury. "Beatrice left everything to Arthur. We have the probate filing right here." "You have a probate filing for the Vance Holding Company," I said, my voice ringing out clear and cold, projecting effortlessly to the 50 stunned high society guests. "A corporate shell company that currently owns 0 physical real estate. You own a paper company, Catherine. You own a checking account with a $4 million balance and $22 million in unsecured commercial debt." I reached into the stack and pulled out a secondary document, a certified corporate solvency report prepared by Sarah Jenkins. I held it up toward the primary investors standing near the fireplace. For the last 3 years, I announced to the room. My father has been securing massive commercial construction loans from regional banks using the Lake Tahoe real estate portfolio as physical collateral. But under Section 4A of the State Banking Code, pledging real property that you do not hold recorded legal title to on a federal commercial loan application constitutes felony bank fraud. A collective gasp rippled through the 50 guests. 2 real estate developers instantly pulled out their cell phones and began dialing their corporate attorneys. The state senator took 5 rapid steps backward, putting as much physical distance between himself and Arthur Vance as the room allowed. Preston looked like he had been struck in the chest with a baseball bat. He stumbled forward, his champagne flute slipping completely out of his hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Dark yellow liquid splashed across his polished designer shoes. You forged Grandma's signature," Preston gasped, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Dad, tell them he forged it. He's a criminal. Grandma didn't just sign these deeds." "Preston?" I said softly, turning my gaze directly onto my trembling older brother. "She recorded a high-definition video deposition 3 days before she passed away. She explicitly stated that she was stripping Arthur of signing authority because he was draining corporate accounts to fund offshore shell entities. And she stated she was cutting you out completely because you are an unfit, financially incompetent liability." Arthur Vance stood paralyzed. His chest heaved violently. The great patriarchal titan who had slapped my face, who had called me an operating appliance, was currently watching his entire $25 million empire evaporate into thin mountain air in front of the most powerful people in the state. "Why?" Arthur whispered, his voice stripped of all booming authority, reduced to a hollow, pathetic wheeze. "Julian, why did you wait 3 years? Why did you let us stand up here tonight and make this announcement?" I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I felt the absolute, intoxicating rush of pure, unadulterated power surge through my veins. "Because I knew you, Arthur," I replied coldly. "I knew that if I showed you these deeds 3 years ago, you would have tied me up in abusive litigation. You would have weaponized Mom's tears. You would have brought Jong Ho to my door. I had to wait until you publicly claimed legal title in front of 50 elite witnesses. I let you build your golden castle on quicksand, specifically so I could watch it sink. I thought I had delivered the final knockout blow, but as I reached into the envelope to pull out Preston's formal eviction notice, my brother reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a document that made my blood run entirely cold. Preston's hand came out of his tailored tuxedo jacket, holding a thick, glossy corporate folder bound with a gold ribbon. For a second, the sheer arrogant momentum of his entire life pushed past his initial panic. He straightened his spine, looked around at the 50 high society guests who were actively whispering, and slapped the gold-ribboned folder onto the mahogany wet bar. "You think you are a mastermind, Julian?" Preston sneered, his voice regaining its slick, practiced country club cadence. "You recorded some real estate deeds. Congratulations. You hold title to the dirt. But you clearly skipped the 2nd semester of finance class at your little state college. Real estate without liquidity is a financial prison." He tapped the glossy folder with 2 manicured fingers. "This is the Master Corporate Assignment Agreement for the Vance Executive Holding Company," Preston announced to the room, looking directly at the regional real estate developers. "Dad and Mom signed it over to me this morning. It controls our primary operating checking accounts, our commercial credit lines, and our $22 million escrow liquidity pool. You might own the physical timber of this mansion, little brother, but I control the cash flow that pays the municipal taxes, the commercial insurance premiums, and the utility infrastructure. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, my attorneys will file an emergency injunction in federal real estate court. We will freeze your little dynasty trust assets in litigation for the next 5 years. I will bleed your personal checking account dry with legal fees before the Thanksgiving holidays." My mother, Catherine, instantly puffed her chest out. The color rushed back into her cheeks. She shot a vindictive, triumphant glare across the Persian rug at me. "Exactly," my mother declared loudly. "Preston holds the capital. You have nothing but paper, Julian. You will be on your knees begging your brother for a maintenance salary by the end of the month. I did not move. I stood 30 feet away, the empty manila envelope resting against my thigh. I watched Preston gloat. I watched my father, Arthur, slowly straighten his tuxedo bow tie, exhaling a heavy breath of relief as he thought his eldest son had just legally outmaneuvered me. Liquidity, I repeated softly. The word traveled effortlessly through the silent ballroom. I walked back to the silver hors d'oeuvres table where I had scattered the recorded county deeds. I reached into the inside breast pocket of my charcoal suit jacket and pulled out a secondary, slim black leather ledger. It was small, worn at the corners from being shoved into my tool belt for 36 months. You mentioned the $22 million escrow liquidity pool, Preston, I said, flipping open the black leather cover. Let's examine how much actual cash is sitting inside that Vance corporate account right now. I looked at Sarah Jenkins, the independent forensic accountant standing near the grand piano. She gave me a single, firm nod. 3 years ago, I explained to the 50 guests. When Grandma Beatrice transferred the physical real estate into my preservation trust, she instructed me to audit the corporate operating accounts. What I discovered was that Arthur Vance hadn't just leveraged the properties. He had been quietly withdrawing massive corporate owner draws to fund Preston's private lifestyle. That is executive compensation, Arthur barked, taking a hard step forward. Preston is the managing director. Preston is a gambling addict. I corrected him plainly. Let's read the ledger entries for the last 24 months. January 12th. $45,000 wired to the Bellagio casino cage in Las Vegas to cover an unsecured marker. March 18th. $80,000 wired to a private legal escrow in Reno to settle a civil lawsuit resulting from Preston totaling your corporate Ferrari 488. August 4th. $120,000 transferred to an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange in the Cayman Islands. Preston's jaw dropped. His hands gripped the edge of the mahogany wet bar. How did you get those wire confirmations? I authorized them, I said. Every single time you called Dad crying about a song by debt or a wrecked luxury car, Dad instructed me to log into the corporate administrative portal and move the numbers. But what Dad didn't realize was that the primary Vance corporate account was already overdrawn by $2.4 million. The ballroom went dead silent. A country club board member literally dropped his cocktail napkin. The bank would have dishonored those wires, I continued, pacing 2 slow steps toward my brother. The state licensing board would have audited the firm and revoked Dad's broker license 2 years ago, but the wires went through. Do you know why, Preston? Because I quietly linked an independent shadow account funded by the Dynasty Trust's commercial rental yields to act as an automated corporate overdraft protection line. I held the black leather ledger high. I paid your gambling debts, Preston, I stated, my voice ringing like a steel bell. I paid your felony DUI defense retainers. I paid for your $12,000 custom watches. I let you play the high-rolling corporate titan while I crawled under the floorboards fixing the boilers. Specifically because every single dollar transferred out of my trust was legally categorized as a secured personal loan executed between Julian Vance and Preston Vance. You stole my inheritance, Preston stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. I saved your ass, I replied coldly. But I am officially done saving it. At 8:30 this morning, Sarah Jenkins executed a statutory clawback provision. We dissolved the shadow overdraft account. We swept the remaining $300,000 of corporate operating liquidity to satisfy your defaulted promissory notes. I closed the black leather ledger with a sharp thwack. Your corporate checking account currently has a negative balance of $48.12. I told my brother. The free ride is over. Arthur Vance looked like all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of his lungs. He stumbled backward against the massive stone fireplace, his hand knocking a priceless antique bronze clock off the mantel. It hit the stone hearth with a heavy, jarring crash, but nobody in the room even looked down at it. 50 elite guests, the mayor, the state senator, the primary commercial lenders, were actively backing toward the grand double doors of the foyer. They looked at my family as if they were carrying an active, highly contagious plague. In the ultra-wealthy enclaves of Lake Tahoe, financial insolvency is the ultimate mortal sin. My mother, Catherine, let out a high-pitched, hysterical gasp. She grabbed Arthur's tuxedo sleeve, her fingers digging into the wool. "Arthur, tell them it's not true. Tell the senator we have the corporate credit lines. Arthur, say something." Arthur didn't say a word. He couldn't. He was staring at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, finally understanding the sheer, crushing scale of the 10-year trap he had built for himself. I reached into the bottom of the manila envelope one last time. My fingers closed around a single, crisp white sheet of paper printed on heavy legal cardstock. I walked directly across the Persian rug, ignoring Thaddeus Sterling, ignoring my mother's sobbing, and stopped 2 feet in front of Preston Vance. My older brother was shaking so violently his submariner watch rattled against his wrist bone. His slick designer tuxedo suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for his deflated frame. I raised the crisp white document and slapped it flat against his chest, pressing my palm hard against his sternum so he was forced to grab the paper to keep it from falling. "You told me earlier tonight that I needed to make myself useful," I told Preston, my voice low, intimate, entirely devoid of mercy. "You told me that Clara Abernathy was pathetic for crying on her porch when you dumped her family memories into a Motel 6. Well, here is your paperwork." Preston looked down at the bold black text printed across the top of the cardstock. "Statutory notice to quit. Unlawful detainer. 24-hour eviction mandate. And this," I announced to the entire room, "is an official eviction notice. Not for Clara Abernathy. For you. You have until 6 p.m. tomorrow to clear your designer suits and your imported cigars out of the master suite. After that, the county sheriff will treat you as an armed trespasser." "Why?" my father suddenly screamed from the fireplace. His voice was a raw, jagged shriek that tore through his vocal cords. He lunged 2 steps forward, spit flying from his lips. "Why did you do this to us, Julian? If you hated us this much, why didn't you just walk away 3 years ago? Why did you let us invite the entire country club here tonight? You engineered our public destruction." I turned my head slowly toward my father. I looked at the man who had fed me leftovers, who had paid me entry-level wages, who had looked me in the eye 7 days ago and told me I was nothing more than an operating piece of company equipment. For the first time in my 32 years on this earth, I felt an absolute, profound inner peace. The psychological weight that had crushed my chest since childhood completely evaporated. "I felt power because I knew you, Arthur," I said evenly. "I knew that if I quietly resigned and moved away, you would have spent the rest of your life spinning the narrative. You would have told the country club that I was a mentally unstable failure who abandoned his family. Mom would have cried her fake tears at Thanksgiving dinners. I had to wait until you publicly put the paper crown on Preston's head in front of every major investor in the basin. I had to make sure that when the truth came out, none of you would have anywhere left to hide." Catherine Vance collapsed quivering into a plush velvet armchair, burying her face in her pearl-encrusted hands. "Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey." I turned my back on my weeping mother. I thought the execution was finished. I thought the Vance family enterprise was officially dead and buried. But as I took my first step toward the grand foyer double doors to leave the ballroom, Preston Vance let out a strange, choked sound from behind the wet bar. It wasn't a sob. It was a dark, desperate, unhinged chuckle. I stopped and looked over my shoulder. Preston was staring at the eviction notice in his hands, his eyes wide and wild like a cornered animal about to bite through its own leg to escape a steel trap. "You think you won, maintenance man?" Preston hissed, reaching deep into the inner tailored pocket of his tuxedo trousers. "You forgot who Grandma Beatrice actually loved. and he pulled out a folded blue document that instantly made Thaddeus Sterling gasp out loud. Preston's trembling fingers unfolded the heavy blue legal backing of the document. He held it up like a physical shield, his chest heaving as a manic, desperate smile stretched across his pale face. "You think your little dynasty preservation trust holds statutory authority, Jules?" Preston gloated, his voice cracking with unhinged adrenaline. "You spent 3 years crawling around in the dark collecting receipts, but you completely missed the master override." He thrust the paper directly toward Thaddeus Sterling. "Read it, Thaddeus," Preston commanded loudly, making sure the state senator and the remaining real estate developers stopped their retreat toward the foyer. "Read the instrument title to the entire room." Thaddeus Sterling hesitated. The 58-year-old lawyer looked deeply exhausted, his wire-rimmed glasses crooked on his nose. He slowly reached out and took the blueback document from Preston's hands. He scanned the bold header printed across the top of the page. It is a statutory durable general power of attorney," Thaddeus read aloud, his voice cautious, trembling slightly. "Executed by Beatrice Vance." "Read the statutory scope, Thaddeus," Preston barked, stepping out from behind the mahogany wet bar, his confidence surging back in an ugly, aggressive wave. "Tell my little brother what Grandma authorized." Thaddeus adjusted his glasses, reading the dense legal paragraphs. "This instrument grants the designated attorney-in-fact immediate, unrestricted, and durable authority over all personal, corporate, and real property assets held by Beatrice Vance. It explicitly grants the authority to revoke, amend, or dissolve any previously established inter vivos or testamentary trusts, including real estate preservation entities." Arthur Vance slowly pushed himself off the stone fireplace. A sudden, vicious spark of hope reignited in my father's bloodshot eyes. He took 3 heavy strides onto the Persian rug, standing shoulder to shoulder with his golden son. "And who is named as the designated attorney-in-fact, Thaddeus?" Arthur demanded, his booming patriarchal voice returning to the vault. "Preston Vance," Thaddeus replied quietly, "with full soul acting authority." My mother, Catherine, literally leaped out of the velvet armchair. She wiped her tears away with the back of her hand, letting out a sharp, breathless laugh of pure vindication. "I knew it." Beatrice knew who the real visionary in this family was. She wouldn't leave $18 million of prime Lake Tahoe real estate to a glorified plumber. Preston sauntered across the rug toward me. He stopped 3 feet away, holding his head high, looking down his nose at my charcoal suit. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, Jules," Preston whispered, his eyes burning with pure malice. "Grandma signed this override. It supersedes your recorded deeds. It dissolves your dynasty trust. That means the real estate reverts directly back to the Vance Holding Trust, which Dad assigned to me this morning. You don't own the dirt. You don't own the mansion. You are trespassing on my private property." He pointed a sharp finger toward the grand double doors. "So take your little eviction notice," Preston sneered. "Walk down to your leaking garage apartment, pack your cheap off-the-rack clothes into garbage bags, and get off my estate before I have Carlos drag you out by your collar." For 30 seconds, the grand living room was completely frozen. The state senator paused near the coat rack. The commercial lenders watched with bated breath. It looked exactly as if the crushing, unfair family dynamics that had ruled my entire life had just violently reasserted themselves. It looked like the golden sun had won. I did not flinch. My heart rate remained entirely flat. When you spend 10 years managing complex municipal zoning permits and fighting corrupt contractors, you learn one fundamental rule of high-stakes conflict. When a desperate opponent suddenly produces a miraculous trump card at the very last second, it is almost always a forgery. I didn't look at Preston. I looked directly at Thaddeus Sterling. "Thaddeus," I said calmly, my voice cutting through my mother's triumphant laughter. "What is the exact execution date stamped next to Grandma Beatrice's notary seal on that power of attorney?" Thaddeus looked down at the bottom of the blue page. "October 14th, 2023. October 14th, I repeated clearly. 2 days before Grandma passed away. Exactly, Preston barked. She signed it on her deathbed because she wanted to make sure you didn't steal the family legacy. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal suit jacket. I didn't pull out a real estate deed. I pulled out a certified, red-stamped medical file obtained directly from the Tahoe Forest Hospital Records Department. Are you entirely sure Grandma signed that document on October 14th, Preston? I asked softly, and I handed the certified medical file directly into Thaddeus Sterling's trembling hands. Thaddeus Sterling flipped open the heavy red cover of the hospital file. His eyes tracked down the clinical timeline stamped by the intensive care unit attending physician. The silence in the room became dangerously heavy. You could hear the wind howling off the freezing waters of Lake Tahoe outside the glass. "Thaddeus?" Arthur Vance asked, his voice dropping into a nervous, uncertain register. "What is that?" Thaddeus didn't answer Arthur. The lawyer's face turned an impossible, chalky shade of gray. His knees visibly buckled a fraction of an inch. He read the clinical notes aloud, his voice sounding like a dry winter leaf scraping across asphalt. Tahoe Forest Hospital ICU patient log. Patient, Beatrice Vance. Date, October 14th, 2023. Time, 0600 hours through 2400 hours. Thaddeus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. Patient suffered a severe grade 4 variceal hemorrhage at 0430 hours. Patient was emergency intubated, placed on mechanical ventilation, and administered continuous intravenous propofol sedation. Patient remained in a medically induced, deep Glasgow 3 coma throughout the entire 48-hour period preceding death. Bilateral soft wrist restraints were applied to prevent endotracheal tube extubation. Thaddeus slowly lowered the red medical folder. He looked at Preston Vance with an expression of absolute, unmitigated professional horror. "She was comatose," Thaddeus whispered. "She was intubated and physically restrained to the bed rails. She couldn't hold a pen, let alone execute a statutory legal instrument." I stepped forward, closing the physical distance between myself and my gloating brother. Preston's face had gone completely dead. The arrogant smirk hadn't just vanished. His entire facial structure seemed to collapse inward. "You didn't just lose the real estate portfolio tonight, Preston," I told him, my voice carrying the absolute weight of a federal indictment. "You just presented a forged, fraudulent statutory document to an officer of the court in front of 50 high society witnesses, including a state senator and 3 commercial bank presidents. Under Title 18 of the United States Criminal Code, that is felony uttering of a forged instrument and first-degree wire fraud." Thaddeus Sterling instantly dropped the blue power of attorney onto the Persian rug as if it were burning his flesh. He backed away from Arthur and Preston, holding his hands up in strict surrender. "I am officially withdrawing as legal counsel for the Vance family enterprise," Thaddeus announced loudly to the entire foyer. "I had zero prior knowledge of this instrument. Arthur, this is criminal forgery. I will not be a party to federal fraud." "Preston," Arthur roared, grabbing his eldest son by both shoulders, violently shaking him. "What did you do? Tell me where you got that document." Preston panicked. The golden son's fragile ego shattered into a million jagged pieces. He stumbled backward against the wet bar, tears of genuine terror spilling down his cheeks. "I had to," Preston shrieked, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical sob. "Dad, I had private debts. I lost 400 grand at the private baccarat tables in Reno last month. I borrowed $500,000 from Greg the Shark and his syndicate. They told me if I didn't put up physical real estate collateral by this weekend, they would break both of my legs. I paid a notary in Reno 5 grand to backdate the stamp. I gave the syndicate the master mansion deed as collateral." My mother screamed, a raw, animalistic sound, and grabbed her hair. Preston looked wildly at the antique bronze clock sitting on the floor. "They're coming tonight, Dad. Greg's syndicate. They told me they were coming to the house at 5 p.m. to collect the principal or take physical possession of the property. I calmly lifted my left wrist and checked my simple off-the-rack watch. It is currently 4:48 p.m., I announced. Arthur Vance spun around. The great patriarch lunged across the rug and physically grabbed the lapels of my charcoal suit jacket. His massive hands were shaking violently. Tears of absolute desperation streamed down his wrinkled, crimson face. "Julian, please," Arthur begged, his booming voice reduced to a pathetic, weeping whimper. "You have to sign the Dynasty Trust over to the corporate account. You have to authorize a commercial wire. He is your brother. They will kill him, Julian. You can't let your own flesh and blood go to prison or get killed by Jong Ho." I looked down at my father's hands gripping my jacket. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I raised my calloused right hand, the hand that had fixed their pipes, the hand that had sliced 3 fingers open to save their commercial leases, and firmly peeled Arthur Vance's fingers off my charcoal one by one. "I don't owe you a single dime, Arthur," I said quietly. "You spent 32 years telling me that I was just an operating piece of equipment. Well, the equipment is officially decommissioned." I turned and walked through the crowd of retreating high society VIPs. I pushed open the massive double mahogany doors of the grand foyer and stepped out onto the freezing stone portico. The mountain air smelled like pine needles and clean, absolute truth. I walked down the granite steps toward my old, beat-up pickup truck parked near the fountain. As I opened the driver's side door, the distinct crunch of heavy tires on gravel echoed up the long private drive. I looked up. 3 massive, black-tinted Lincoln Navigator SUVs turned past the Vance Estate stone security gates and accelerated rapidly toward the main mansion. It wasn't just Greg, the Shark's loan syndicate. Directly behind the Navigators were 4 marked Washoe County Sheriff's cruisers and 2 Federal Financial Crimes Task Force sedans, their red and blue flashing lights cutting brilliantly through the Tahoe twilight. I didn't stay to watch the handcuffs click. I didn't stay to hear my mother wail as the federal agents seized the property. I climbed into my truck, turned the ignition, and drove down the mountain. 1 year later, the midsummer sun reflected brilliantly off the crystal-clear waters of Lake Tahoe, sending dancing ripples of golden light across the polished cedar deck of my office building. I sat behind a clean, modern executive desk on the 3rd floor of a commercial real estate complex on the North Shore. The bronze plaque mounted beside the glass foyer double doors read, "Vance and Jenkins Luxury Property Management, LLC." In 12 months, Sarah Jenkins and I had built the most profitable, highly respected independent real estate management firm in the entire basin. We didn't achieve it by leveraging debt or intimidating tenants. We achieved it through absolute financial transparency, meticulous asset maintenance, and treating our contractors like actual human beings. My salary wasn't $45,000 anymore. I owned 70% of an entity managing $90 million in regional assets. I wore a tailored navy blue suit that actually fit my shoulders. The crushing, constant physical exhaustion that had defined my 20s was entirely gone. I closed my laptop, grabbed a woven gift basket loaded with fresh organic peaches, artisan sourdough, and imported English tea from the credenza, and walked down to my truck. 10 minutes later, I turned my pickup onto the quiet, tree-lined private drive of the lakefront guest cottage. The property looked entirely transformed. The overgrown, hazardous pine branches had been professionally pruned back. The rotting front porch railings had been replaced with reinforced, weather-treated mahogany, and a brand-new, high-efficiency commercial HVAC unit hummed quietly along the sidewall. I walked up the steps and knocked gently on the door. "Come in, Julian," a warm, cheerful voice called out. I opened the door and stepped into the sunlit living room. 85-year-old Clara Abernathy was sitting in a plush recliner by the window overlooking the water, knitting a soft wool blanket. The cottage was warm, smelling of cinnamon and fresh pine. "You didn't have to bring groceries again, dear?" Clara smiled, her bright blue eyes crinkling at the corners as I set the basket onto her kitchen table. "The young man from your maintenance crew, Carlos, already stopped by yesterday to check my refrigerator and clean the gutter filters. Carlos is a great senior property supervisor." I smiled, pouring us 2 cups of hot water from the kettle. He makes sure our most important tenants are taken care of. Clara took her teacup with steady hands. She looked out at the peaceful blue lake, then looked up at me with profound, maternal gratitude. Your grandmother Beatrice would be so incredibly proud of the man you became, Julian. You didn't let their bitterness turn your heart into stone. I sat across from her, sipping my tea. That was the ultimate payoff of my entire journey. I hadn't just defeated my father's patriarchy. I had successfully broken the generational curse. I had acquired power without sacrificing my humanity. I finished my tea, gave Clara a gentle hug goodbye, and drove back toward downtown Tahoe. I thought the ghosts of the Vance family were permanently locked away in Washoe County Court archives. But when I stepped out of the elevator into my third-floor office lobby 20 minutes later, I discovered that the past still had one final, desperate trap to spring. Standing in the center of my sunlit office foyer, wearing a designer trench coat and holding a small silver USB drive, was Elena Rostova. Elena was 30 years old, my former fiancée. 2 years ago, when my father had explicitly refused to promote me and my mother had begun spreading rumors about my mental stability, Elena had quietly packed her bags, broken our engagement, and accepted an invitation to join Preston's elite socialite circle at the country club. She had decided that being the wife of a glorified maintenance man didn't fit her long-term financial profile. Now, she offered me a soft, practiced, teary-eyed smile as I walked past the receptionist's desk. "Julian," Elena breathed, taking 2 dramatic steps toward me. You look absolutely incredible." "Elena," I said plainly, stopping 5 feet away, keeping my hands securely in my trousers pockets. "You are trespassing in my corporate lobby. Sarah, call building security." "No, wait, please," Elena pleaded, holding the silver USB drive out like an olive branch. "I didn't come here to ask for money. I came here to protect you. Preston sent me a letter from the Federal Correctional Facility in Victorville last week. He is sharing a cell with a wire fraud hacker. Julian, Preston hid $400,000 in an unregulated offshore crypto wallet before his arrest. This USB has the administrative access keys. I brought it directly to you, so you can seize the funds before his attorneys use them to file a civil appeal against your dynasty trust." She let a single, perfect tear roll down her cheek. "I never stopped loving you, Jules. I was manipulated by your mother. Let me prove I belong on your team." I didn't reach for the USB drive. I looked at Sarah Jenkins, who had just stepped out of the glass conference room holding an iPad. "Sarah," I said calmly, "take the drive directly to our IT cybersecurity desk. Run it through an isolated sandbox firewall." Sarah took the silver drive using a plastic evidence bag. 5 minutes later, while Elena stood nervously shifting her weight in the foyer, Sarah walked back out. Her face was entirely grim. "It's an active executable Trojan keylogger," Sarah announced to the lobby. "The moment this USB is plugged into a primary network terminal, it executes a background script designed to harvest master administrative passwords and route them to an external IP address registered in Southern California. It's a federal prison cyber trap." Elena's practiced face instantly turned bone white. I didn't know," Preston told me. "Preston used you as a courier to commit federal parole violation," I told her coldly. 2 uniformed building security officers stepped out of the stairwell and firmly grasped Elena by both elbows, escorting her protesting, crying figure out through the glass foyer double doors. As the doors swung shut, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number from a cheap prepaid carrier. I swiped the screen and put it to my ear. "Julian?" My mother's voice rasped. The background noise was unmistakable. The loud, roaring diesel engines of semi-trucks idling and the screech of highway traffic. Catherine Vance sounded 30 years older. "Julian, please don't hang up," my mother sobbed. "Your father filed for Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy. The IRS seized our bank accounts for back taxes. We are living in a 20-year-old Fleetwood RV parked behind a Walmart off Interstate 80 in Reno. The generator died this morning. It's 90 degrees inside, Julian. Arthur's trial starts next month. We don't have $5,000 for the legal defense retainer. Please, you have $90 million in assets. Send us $5,000. I am your mother. I stood by the glass window of my office, looking down at the sparkling blue waters of Lake Tahoe. I didn't feel a single drop of vindictive triumph. I didn't yell. I didn't list the 18 years of emotional abuse. Catherine, I said gently, my voice calm, dignified, entirely detached. The Walmart parking lot has a public shaded transit shelter near the garden center. I suggest you and Arthur sit there during the afternoon heat. I wish you both adequate health. And I pressed the red button, ending the call forever. The mountain twilight descended slowly over Lake Tahoe, painting the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevadas in deep shades of violet and burnt orange. I stood leaning against the rough-hewn cedar railing of the expansive back deck of my own home, a modern, 4-bedroom timber and stone residence perched high on a ridge overlooking the water. Every single square foot of the property, every piece of furniture, every nail driven into the deck was paid for with clean, audited funds. The deed recorded at the county clerk's office bore one name, Julian Vance. I reached down to the small outdoor glass patio table and picked up a bottle of red wine. It wasn't an 18-year-old imported single malt scotch. It wasn't a $500 bottle of French champagne bought to impress country club board members who would abandon you the second your credit lines froze. It was a simple $28 bottle of organic Zinfandel produced by a small family vineyard in the Sierra foothills. The label printed across the dark glass read one word in clean, bold script, freedom. I pulled the cork, poured a generous measure into a stemless glass, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine tasted rich, grounded, tasting of dark blackberries, mountain soil, and hard-won personal independence. I looked down at the estate lights twinkling along the lakeshore below. For 10 years, I had believed that being the family spare was a tragic, suffocating life sentence. I thought my role as the invisible infrastructure, the man crawling in the freezing crawlspaces while the golden sun toasted the politicians upstairs, was proof that I was fundamentally unlovable. Now, taking another sip of my wine in the cool mountain breeze, I finally understood the profound irony of my existence. Being ignored by narcissistic sociopaths wasn't a curse. It was my ultimate protective armor. Because while Arthur and Catherine Vance were busy polishing Preston's paper crown and teaching him how to project fake leverage to high society investors, they left me completely alone in the Hammai. They left me alone with the municipal building codes. They left me alone with the banking statutes. They left me alone to learn how actual value is generated, maintained, and legally protected. They thought they were burying me in the dirt. They didn't realize I was a seed. I set my wine glass down onto the cedar railing. I watched a lone speedboat cut a clean, white wake across the darkening blue mirror of the lake. The greatest revelation of healing from a toxic family dynamics isn't the moment you execute the legal trap. It isn't watching the police navigators turn into the driveway. It is the quiet, magnificent morning you wake up in your own bed and realize that your internal monologue is no longer speaking in your father's critical, abusive voice. I stopped trying to keep people warm who were actively setting me on fire. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't cold anymore. I want to step out of the story for just a moment and talk directly to you. Whether you are sitting in your kitchen in Ohio listening to this while drinking your morning coffee, driving home from a long shift in Texas, or relaxing on your porch in Florida after putting the grandkids to bed, I know exactly who is listening to my voice right now. You are the invisible backbone of your family. You are the daughter who spent 5 years managing your aging parents' complex medical appointments and balancing their checkbooks, only to watch them hand the family home over to a brother who hasn't visited on Thanksgiving in a decade. You are the mother who sacrificed your own career, your 401k contributions, and your personal sanity to build a stable foundation for a spouse or children who look at your daily labor as basic, unpaid equipment maintenance. You are the one who stays up until 2 a.m. fixing the emotional and financial pipe bursts of people who laugh at your clothes and dismiss your boundaries. I want to tell you something that Arthur and Catherine Vance spent 32 years trying to erase from my mind. Your maintenance function is not your human worth. When you spend your entire life building a grand dining table where the people sitting in the VIP chairs actively refuse to leave a seat for you, you do not stand in the corner holding a mop waiting for them to spill their drinks. You do not beg them for a single scrap of validation. You quietly pick up your tools, you walk out the front door, and you build your own room. Establishing strict financial, legal, and emotional boundaries with toxic family members is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It is the rescue mission you execute to save the child inside you who deserved to be loved simply for existing. Thank you from the very bottom of my heart for walking this difficult 10-year journey with Julian Vance today. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the crushing weight of that living room and the absolute triumph of Mrs. Clara Abernathy keeping her peaceful lakefront home, please take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to choose between protecting a toxic family legacy and saving your own sanity? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, because your experiences prove that none of us are walking this path alone. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the truth. Until next time, guard your peace, protect your receipts, and remember your inherent worth.